In this episode, I'm going to show you how to create filter for our products. Of course, we are going to filter those products by category, since that is the only parameter that we have for the products at the moment. So you are going to learn how to use Directus to filter your items, how to pass parameters to your GraphQL query, and how to handle filtering with React query. So let's get to work. Okay, so first of all, what do we need for our filters? We need checkboxes in our case, because we are going to be filtering our products by category, and I want to have checkboxes so that the users can check few of those boxes, and we are going to display only the products that are in those categories. So first of all, I'm going to go to my components directory in our app folder, and in components we are going to create a file which we are going to call checkbox.jsx. Okay, so now that we created checkbox, this is going to be a very simple component that is just going to be a checkbox for us, and we are going to be reusing it for all of our categories or whatever we need inside of our application. So first of all, I'm just going to add some boilerplate right here. So we are just exporting the full checkbox. We are going to have two parameters, label and ID, and then I'm going to add some HTML or JSX for our flexbox. So first of all, we have a label that is wrapping around our input field, which is of type checkbox, of course. We have some classes. We pass the ID to the value. So we are going to filter our products by ID, by actually category ID. So we are going to get category ID right here. Then we have the span just for styling, and then we show the label. So for example, it's going to be either hats, t-shirts or mugs. And that's about it. So now we created our checkbox. Great. Save this. Next thing we want to do, we want to create a filter component. So maybe in the future we are going to have few filters for our product category, for our categories. So I'm going to create a filter component in which we are going to add our checkboxes and maybe later something else. So now we are going to create filter.jsx or filters. So in our components, we are going to create a new file, which is going to be called filters.jsx. And in it, I'm also just going to add some boilerplate. So in filters, we are importing checkbox because we are going to need it, and we are going to import it into filters. For the parameters, we have categories. So we want to pass all the categories that we have on our site, and then we want to map through them. And then we want to display checkbox component for every category we have. Category is going to receive a key, of course, is going to receive a label that we are passing right here, and it's going to receive an ID. So ID right here, that is going to be the value of our checkbox. So very simple, dumb component. It doesn't do any logic. We're just passing categories in it, just like in checkbox, we are passing labels and IDs, and that's it. So for the label, we are going to check the category name, because that's the name of the field for our label. For the ID is of course going to be category ID, and that's about it. So this is a very simple component that we are going to create. Okay, save it, and that's it. Next thing that we want to do, we want to create queries for our categories so that we get the categories from our API, and then we want to display them on the page. Now in homepage queries, what we want to do is create a query for getting our categories. That is very simple. And it's going to follow this pattern right here that we have for homepage post query, homepage products query. So I'm just going to paste it in. Let us take a look at it. So it's going to be called homepage categories query. The query is called homepage categories. We are just getting the categories, and from the categories we are getting the ID and the category name, which is going to be our label. Great. Save this. Now, of course, we need to go to queries and create our query method, which is going to be very similar to homepage products. So I'm just going to paste this here, and I'm going to call this one get homepage categories. And of course, we are not going to call homepage products query, but we are going to call homepage categories query. categories query, and of course we need to import it right here. Okay, homepage categories query. Now, one thing we need to change right here is this is going to be called data categories. Okay, so now we have set up our queries. We have set up our query method. Next thing we need to do, we need to create our React query method and then display those categories on our page. Now in our index.js file, first of all, we wanna import filters component from components filters. Next thing that we wanna do, we wanna create a React query method that is going to be very similar to this where we are getting the products. So I'm just going to paste it in. So the data is going to be called categories. Is success, since we already have this is success, we need to rename it. And it's going to be called categories success. We are using the query. We are calling this query categories. And all we are doing, we are waiting for get homepage categories right here. So since this is not imported yet, we need to import it right here. Get homepage categories. Okay, so this is going to get our categories. Next thing that we need to do is we need to display those categories on our page. We are going to do that below this title of latest products. So to do it, we need to do something like category success. And if we got those categories, then we want to display something. And we want to display filters. Filters has categories prop. So categories is going to be the categories that we are getting from here. So remember, in our filters, we are mapping through categories to display those checkboxes with the names of our categories. So we are going to send categories in here, close out this component, and then we got category success. If this call is successful, then display the filters component and pass categories in it. Save this. And I think that this should be working now. We can check it out in our browser. So as you can see right here, we get hats, t-shirts, and mugs. We can click on it. So these are our checkboxes with hats, t-shirts, and mugs. Great. Next thing we need to do, we need to create a way so when somebody clicks on this, we get the ID of category somehow. And that is what we are going to be doing right now. Before we begin doing that, let me just show you how filtering in Directus works. We are going to be using GraphQL Playground for that. Currently, I already have a query right here, and if I click play, I'm going to get all of the products. So I already showed you this. So what if we want to get the products that are just in, for example, hats category or t-shirts category and so on? So what we need to do is we need to add a filter right here, filter. And then we want to say, okay, filter that by category. So that is this right here. And of course, in categories, we have categories ID. As you can see, this is already auto-completing for me, categories ID. And then we want to filter it by the ID of the category. So we do ID. And then we need to add an operator right here. So for example, that operator can be something like underscore EQ, right? EQ means equals 2, and then we can just say, for example, 1. So we want to display all the categories that have all the products that have a category in the ID of 1. And if I click play, now as you can see, we get only one product, super duper hat. If I do 2, then we get original t-shirt, which is category of ID 2, right? And if we do 3, then we should get, what's the third one? Mugs, right? Okay, great. But we don't want to do this exactly. What we want to do is we actually want to, as the user checks the checkboxes, we want to show all the products that are in those categories, in multiple categories, which we cannot do with this equal operator. We need to use the in operator. So we want to get the products that are in certain categories. So for example, I can filter it by just one category by doing in and then this angle brackets and then just do 1. So just like you're sending an array here, and if I click this, then this works. But also I can do comma 2. So I'm going to show the products from the categories 1 and 2. Click play, and now I get 2 products. If I do 3, then I would get all of the products, right? Great. So this is the way that filtering works in Directus. Now what we need to do is we need to get those ID from our checkboxes and then somehow send it to our query, to our products query. And that is what we are going to be doing next. Okay, so now we need to send, when somebody clicks on this checkbox right here, we need to send this ID to our index.js file. And how do we do that? Well, you know how to do it when you are sending props from your parent component to your child component. You would just send it inside of props. But in this case, we don't have that possibility because checkbox is a child component of index, and we need to get the ID of whatever checkbox is clicked to the index page, to its parent component. So how do we do that? Well, you need to create a function which we are going to call getSelectedCategories. And this function is going to receive an argument of category. And for now, we are just going to console log out the category, just to see if this works, if we are getting the IDs of the categories that we click on. Okay, so that's it. Next thing we need to do, since the checkbox is actually a child of filters categories, we need to pass it first to filters. So I'm just going to call this prop also get selected categories, and it's going to be equal to get selected categories, right? Great, but without these braces. Okay, save this. And next thing we need to do, we need to go into filters, and in here we do get selected categories also, and then pass it in to our checkbox. Okay, like this. And now I'm just going to add all of these props to a single line so that we can see it better. So now we have key, label, ID, get selected categories, and we are passing in this function to our checkbox. Save this, and now we go to our checkbox.jsx. Also here, we need to define get selected categories. Great. And now we need to pass the value, this ID, to get selected categories function, and then that is going to go up the tree and end up in our index.jsx if we do it right. So to do that, on our input, we just do onChange. So when somebody clicks on our input field, we want to get the event of that field. We call it E. And then what we want to do, we want to get selected categories. And in here, I'm going to say event target value. Okay, so we are now defining that when somebody clicks on this, send this function up the tree, and with it send the ID that we defined right here. One thing that we want to do, I'm just going to add a plus symbol right here, because I want to convert this ID, since it's going to be a string, I want to convert it to a number, because we need to send a number to our GraphQL query, not a string, for it to work, right? So when I save this, this I hope should be working. So let's check it out. I'm going to open up my console, going to refresh this, and now when I click hats, I get number 1. When I click t-shirts, I get number 2. Great. When I click mugs, I get number 3. So now the IDs of our categories are getting into our index.jsx file. Great. So now that we got this figured out, we need to actually transform this into an array. Because remember, for this to work, we need to send an array inside of our in operator. So let's try to do that. In our index.jsx file, I'm going to import useEffect and useState. We are going to use useEffect just so I can console log out what is happening with the useState method or useState hook. And in here, I'm going to do something like const selected categories. So I created a state which is going to say selected categories and set selected categories method, and we are going to use that method to set our selected categories, right? Which is going to be an array. So whatever we get from our checkboxes, we are going to put it or push it into an array so that we can send it to our query. Okay, so once we did that, I'm just going to paste this use effect in, just so that we can see what's going on. So this use effect is just watching the selected categories. Once something with those selected categories changes, the use effect is going to trigger and it's going to console log out what is the current state of selected categories so that we can see it. I'm going to remove products from here, and probably I'm going to comment this out. And now how do we set selected categories? So once we receive a category, what we can do, we can just say set selected categories, and then in here I just want to open up this array and get selected categories. So we are getting current selected categories inside of this array. We are spreading them out and adding the current category that is selected. Category. Okay, so let's see what this does. Okay, so if I save this, go to my browser, refresh this, as you can see, we are getting an empty array. So that's good because our use state is defining empty array once the page is loaded. So the next thing that I want to try out, if I click on heads, now we get one but inside of an array. Let me make this a bit bigger. If I click t-shirts, now I get 1 and 2. If I click mugs, I get 1, 2, 3. Great, this seems to be working, but it's not working very well because look what happens if I click on mugs again. So now I get 3, 3, and now I get 1, 2, 3, 3, 2. And now I get 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. So this is not good because what we want to happen when somebody clicks on mugs, we want to actually remove that if it's already checked, right? So we want to remove that mug from our array. So let's do that. So let's fix that, and the fix is actually pretty easy. So what we want to do right here is we want to say if selected categories includes, not set selected categories, but selected categories. If selected categories includes category, so that means that the category is already present inside of our array. We actually then want to remove that category. And how do we do that? Well, it's a one-liner. So what this here says set selected categories, then we get selected categories and we filter that array by doing remove. Actually, we want to show in that category every item that is not the current category that we selected, right? So this is effectively going to remove the category that already exists inside of our array. And then we just want to return this. Save it and let's see if this works. So if we go to our browser, refresh it, and then I click heads, I click t-shirts, I click mugs. Now if I, for example, click t-shirts, we should see that the number 2 is gone from our category, right? So now we have only 1 and 3. And if I click mugs, then we have just 1. And if I click heads, then we have an empty category. So this is how this is going to work. Now all we have to do is we have to send that to our query and actually create another query, because which kind of sucks. If I go to GraphQL Playground, what I would like, how I would like this to work would be that if I send an empty array right here, I get all the products, but unfortunately I get an error. So we are going to need to create another query, which is going to be called something like get filtered categories. And then in that query, we are going to send this. And when our array is empty, then we are just going to display all of the products. You will see it's not that complicated. Now, in our homepage queries, I'm going to create a query that we need. I'm going to paste it in. And this query is going to be called homepage filtered products query. and this is our query. So it looks a bit different than the rest of the queries. It has a few more arguments. So first of all, homepage products, we are defining a variable called categories. What you need to do is you need to define that variable, and also you need to define the type of that variable, which is going to be an array of floats in our case. So just think of it as an array of numbers. And then we do the filtering like I showed you in the GraphQL playground. So we filter category by categories ID, and the ID in operator is going to receive categories. And of course, our categories are going to be this selected categories that we defined in Nextjs. Okay, so we save that. Now, next thing we need to do, we need to go into our queries, and our query method is also going to be just a little bit different than we are used to. So we are getting get homepage filter products. We are calling the homepage filter product query, but also we are sending categories in, right? As you can see, these are empty. These don't receive any parameters. For this one, we need to receive those parameters. And then we define in our variables, which are usually empty for us, we define those categories. Now those categories are going to go into homepage filter products query and going to end up right here so that we can filter our products by category. And also here we are just returning data products. Save this. Great. Now that we have this set up, we need to do some magic right here, because currently this isn't going to work. We will actually need to create another method which is going to call either get homepage products, or it's going to call get homepage filter products, depending if this selected categories array is empty or not. So let's do that. So here I'm going to create a function called async function, actually called handle product filtering. And this is going to receive a parameter of query key, which React query is sending by default to this method that we are going to define here in just a second. But first of all, let's just get that query key. Okay. Now we want to get whatever is inside that query key, and we are just going to have this. So underscore, this is going to actually be the first item in the array. So the query key is actually an array, and that first item is going to be this set selected categories array. So it's equal to query key. Okay. So what we want to do now is we just want to check the length of this. So remember, this is actually selected categories. So if the length of that is empty, if it's 0, then we want to do something like this. So if that length, you can of course do greater than 0 or less than 1 or something like that, but you can just do if length. So this is going to check if the array is empty or not. So if this is empty, if this isn't empty actually, so that length, if this isn't empty, we want to return await get homepage filter products. And first of all, I'm going to import it here. So get homepage filter products. And in it, I want to say query key 0. I'm going to show you what the query key is in our console log, just so that you don't get confused about that. We can also just say this right here, but I'm going to leave it to be query key 0. So the first item in the query key array. Okay, and if selected categories are empty, then we just want to return get homepage products, and that's it. So this is going to return all of the products from our API. And let me just so you can see what's going on, let me do query key. So we want to console log query key so that you can see what this actually is. Now this is not going to work out of the box, because what we need to do right here is, instead of calling this products, we want to call this selected categories. You can actually do products like this, and then do comma and then selected categories, but I'm not going to do that. We are just going to say selected categories. What this is going to do is it is going to rerun this query wherever selected categories changes, and those are going to change once we click on those checkboxes. And for async await, we are not going to do async await here, but we are just going to say handle product filtering. Handle product filtering, and that should actually be it. Let's just save this, go to our browser, refresh the page, and hope that this is working. So this array 0 is actually our query key. As you can see, it currently has one item in it, and that item is an empty array. And since this is an empty array, we are getting all of our products. Now, if we choose heads, we get nothing. If we choose t-shirts, we get nothing. So I probably screwed something up here. Let me just see what I screwed up. So I think in queries.js I didn't import homepage filter products query. So that could definitely screw up this. So if I save it, go to the browser, let's try it again. So if I click on heads, now I get heads, and this is our query key, just so you know what we are getting. So we are just getting this array inside of another array, and that's the first item in that array. And if we click t-shirts, then we get t-shirts. If we click mugs, we get mugs also. We can remove t-shirts and leave only mugs, and if we remove everything, then we get all of the products. So this is the way that you can make your filters work inside of your web shop or e-commerce application. Okay guys, so this has been it for this video. Remember, everything we did here will be available for you on GitHub. The link will be in the description below. And as always, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one.